The cell smelled like rust, and something Yuna could not name. It was a sharp smell, like metal left in rain, but heavier. She sat in the corner, with her back against the cold wall, and her knees pulled up to her chest. Around her, creatures she had never imagined paced back and forth in the long holding chamber. Some of them were tall, with skin like stone. Some had too many arms. One of them kept making a sound deep in its throat, like a machine trying to start. None of them looked at her. She was too small to notice. She was 24 years old. She weighed 58 kilograms. On Earth, she had been a factory worker in a coastal town south of Busan. She had never left her country before the ships came. The ships had come 5 years ago. They appeared in the sky without warning, enormous and dark, blocking the sun over entire cities. The Galactic Dominion, they called themselves. They said humanity was a level 2 species, which meant humans were not smart enough to be partners and not strong enough to be soldiers. But they were numerous, and they were entertaining to watch. So the Dominion offered Earth a deal. Send us your people, a few every cycle, and we will leave your planet alone. Earth's governments agreed quietly, behind closed doors, without telling anyone what the tributes were really for. They were for the arena. Yuna stretched her arms above her head and rolled her neck slowly. Her knuckles were bruised from hitting the wall during her training in the cell. There was nothing else to hit. She opened and closed her fists, feeling the sting, welcoming it. Pain meant her hands still worked. A woman knelt beside her. Minji. She was older than Yuna by a few years, with tired eyes and steady hands. She had been a nurse on Earth before she was taken. Now, she was a medic in the cells, keeping the fighters alive long enough to die in front of a crowd. She took Yuna's hands without asking, and began wrapping the knuckles with a strip of cloth torn from her own sleeve. "You don't have to do this," Minji said quietly. "You know that." Yuna watched her work. Sujin is 17. I know how old she is. Then you know why I'm here. Minji said nothing after that. She finished the wrapping and squeezed Yuna's hands once before letting go. Sujin was a girl from Yuna's settlement, a skinny girl with big eyes who still cried for her mother at night. When her name was called in the draft, Yuna had stepped forward and said she would go instead. The Dominion soldiers did not care. One human was the same as another to them. Across the cell, an old man sat on a metal bench with his eyes closed. His name was Hyun. He had gray hair and a calm face that never showed fear. On Earth, he had planned military operations. He had studied war the way some people study music, with patience and love and terrible focus. He had been taken in the second cycle, and had survived longer than any other human on this station. Not because he fought, but because he watched. He learned. He remembered. He opened his eyes and looked at Yuna. "The one they matched you with is called Lura," he said. His voice was flat and low, the voice of a man saving his energy. 4 arms, blades on the forearms, natural armor on the chest and back, but nothing on the joints, nothing on the neck. She is fast in straight lines, but turns slowly. She will charge you first. They always charge first. They think humans freeze. Yuna listened. She did not write anything down. She did not need to. "No human has beaten her class," Hyun added. He said it like a fact, not a warning. "I know," Yuna said. A sound like thunder rolled through the walls. The arena above them was waking up. Yuna could feel the vibration in her teeth. Hundreds of thousands of aliens filling the seats, stamping their feet, clashing their limbs together in excitement. They had come to watch blood. They had come to be entertained. A guard came to the cell door. It was a tall creature with 6 fingers and no expression on its flat face. It pointed at Yuna. "Human female. You are next." Yuna stood. She was not tall. She was not wide. She did not look like a fighter. Minji grabbed her arm and held it for a moment, and then let go. Hyun gave her a single nod. That was all. She walked through the corridor alone. The walls were lined with lights that buzzed and flickered. She could hear the crowd growing louder with every step. At the end of the corridor, a massive gate waited, and beyond it, lights so bright, it erased everything. The gate opened. She stepped out onto the arena floor, and the noise hit her like a wave. The stadium was enormous. A hollow ring floating in space with a sand-covered floor and energy barriers shimmering along the edges. The crowd filled every level. Thousands of species packed together, their faces blurred by distance and light. Floating platforms carried cameras that circled the arena like metal birds. Above it all, a massive holographic screen displayed the fighters' images. On one of the floating platforms stood Dorak, the grand announcer. He was tall, even for his species, with 6 limbs and a voice that had been designed for cruelty. He loved his job. He loved the fear in the fighters' eyes. He loved the way the crowd laughed when he wanted them to laugh. He raised his arms, and the crowd quieted, leaning forward. "For our next match," Dorak boomed, his voice filling every corner of the station. From the dirt world called Earth, a female of the human species. He paused for effect. "Park Yuna." He repeated the name slowly. "Park. Is that what they call the places where animals rest on her world?" He tilted his head, as if genuinely puzzled. "Perhaps she will lie down for us too." The crowd exploded with laughter. It was the deep, rolling laughter of beings who had never once considered that a human could be anything other than a joke. The sound filled the arena, from floor to ceiling. On the opposite side of the sand, her opponent Lura stepped out, a four-armed insectoid creature with blades growing from her forearms. Even Lura was smiling, if her species could smile. Yuna stood in the center of the arena. She did not react. She did not look at Dorak. She did not look at the crowd. She looked straight ahead at Lura, and she breathed. In, out, in, out. The laughter began to thin, not because anyone told it to stop, but because something felt wrong. The tiny human in the middle of the sand was not shaking. She was not frozen. She stood the way a person stands when they have already decided what is going to happen, and they are simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. The silence spread like cold water. Row by row, section by section, the laughter died. Dorak opened his mouth to say something else, something clever, but the words did not come. He looked down at Yuna, and for a reason he could not explain, his voice caught in his throat. The cameras circled closer. On the giant screen above the arena, Yuna's face filled the frame. Her eyes were steady. Her jaw was set. Her bruised fingers curled slowly into fists at her sides. Dorak swallowed. He pressed the signal. "Begin," he said, and the arena fell silent. Lura moved first. She came fast, faster than anything that size should have been able to move. All 4 arms spread wide, and her bladed forearms catching the arena light like glass. She crossed the distance between them in less than 2 seconds, and when she swung her leading arm, it cut the air with a sound like tearing cloth. The blow was aimed at Yuna's neck. It would have taken her head clean off. Yuna stepped to the left. Not a leap, not a dive, a single step, small and calm, as if she were moving out of the way of someone on a crowded sidewalk. Lura's arm cut through empty space, and the momentum carried her forward, her clawed feet dragging furrows in the sand as she tried to stop. The crowd made a sound, not a cheer, not a gasp, something in between, the kind of sound people make when they see something they do not yet understand. Lura spun around, her compound eyes locked onto Yuna, who had not moved from the spot where she had stepped. Yuna's arms were still at her sides. She was watching Lura the way a person watches rain through a window, patiently, as if she had all the time in the world. Lura charged again. This time she came lower, leading with 2 arms while the other 2 swung from the sides like closing jaws. It was a killing pattern, designed to trap prey between 4 blades with no escape. Yuna dropped, not to her knees, but into a low crouch, letting the upper blades pass over her head so close that they cut strands of her hair. She was inside Lura's guard now, beneath the reach of those terrible arms, and she moved. She struck the inside of Lura's front left knee. Not a punch. It was the heel of her palm, driven upward into the joint where Hyun had told her there was no armor. The sound it made was wet and sharp, like a branch snapping under ice. Lura screamed, a high-pitched vibrating sound that hurt the ears, and her leg buckled. Before Lura could adjust, Yuna was already moving. She rolled to the right, came up on her feet, and struck the elbow joint of Lura's lower right arm. Same technique, same precision. The arm went limp and swung uselessly at Lura's side. The crowd was silent now. Not the uncomfortable silence of before, but the absolute silence of beings who were watching something they had never seen. On the floating platform, Dorak stood with his mouth half open. His commentary screen blinked at him, waiting for words he could not find. Lura tried to retreat. She stumbled backward on her damaged leg, her remaining functional arms raised in defense. She was making sounds now, fast clicking sounds that might have been words in her language. She was not laughing anymore. Her compound eyes were wide, and in them was something Yuna recognized because she had seen it in the eyes of every person who had been dragged to the tribute ships on Earth. Fear. Yuna did not enjoy it. She took no pleasure in what she was doing. But she did not stop. She closed the distance in 3 quick steps. Lura swung her upper left arm in a desperate, wild arc. It was the kind of swing a fighter makes when they are no longer thinking, when their body has taken over and their mind has already accepted what is happening. Yuna leaned back just enough for the blade to pass in front of her face, and then she stepped forward into the opening it left behind. She hit Lura twice in the neck, where the hard shell of her body gave way to softer tissue. The strikes were fast and precise. 2 sharp impacts delivered with the first 2 knuckles of her right hand. Lura's head snapped sideways, and for a moment the insectoid fighter stood perfectly still, like a building in the instant before it falls. Then her legs folded, and she went down, hitting the sand with a heavy thud that sent dust rising into the air. Lura lay on her back. 3 of her 4 arms were broken or dislocated. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, but she was breathing. Yuna had hit her hard enough to end the fight, but not hard enough to end her life. That was not an accident. That was a choice. Yuna stood over her fallen opponent. Blood ran from a cut on her shoulder where Lura's blade had grazed her during the second charge. She had not even noticed it happen. She looked down at Lura, then up at the crowd, then at Dorak on his platform. Her chest rose and fell with deep, controlled breaths. Her face showed nothing. The arena's clock displayed the fight duration. 61 seconds. Dorak stared at the number. He looked at Yuna. He looked at the fallen Lura. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then tried again. The human female is the winner, he said. His voice cracked on the last word. It was the first time in his career that the grand announcer had stumbled over a result. He tried to recover. A surprising outcome. The human was lucky. Her opponent was clearly unprepared. But even as he said it, the replay was already playing on the holographic screens above the arena. Every angle, every frame. The crowd watched Yuna's movements in slow motion. The precise footwork, the targeted strikes, the way she had studied Lura's patterns and exploited every weakness in less than a minute. There was no luck on that screen. There was something far more dangerous. The guards led Yuna back to the holding cells. She walked through the corridor with the same steady pace she had entered with. But once the gate closed behind her and she was out of sight, her legs shook. She braced herself against the wall and breathed hard. The adrenaline was leaving her body all at once, and it left behind a trembling emptiness that made her teeth chatter. Minji was waiting. She guided Yuna to the bench and made her sit, then peeled back the torn fabric around the shoulder wound. It was not deep, but it was long, running from her shoulder blade almost to her collarbone. Minji cleaned it with water and pressed the cloth tight. "You won," Minji said. Her voice was strange, as if she did not fully believe the words. "Yes, in 60 seconds. 61, Yuna said. She tried to smile, but her face would not cooperate. Her hands were shaking in her lap, and she could not make them stop. She pressed them flat against her thighs and stared at them. Minji watched her for a long moment. "Are you okay?" Yuna did not answer right away. She looked up at the ceiling, at the metal and lights and the distant vibration of the crowd, still murmuring above them. Then she turned to Minji. "Have you heard anything about Taeho?" Minji hesitated. She sat down beside Yuna and spoke carefully. "There are rumors. Some of the other captives have talked about a human man in the upper levels. The champion tier cells. He's been here a long time. He's hurt, they say. Can't fight anymore. But alive? The rumors say alive. I don't know for certain." Yuna closed her eyes. For a few seconds she was not in the cell anymore. She was standing on the shore near Busan, 7 years old, holding her brother's hand, while the waves reached for their bare feet. Taeho had been 10, tall for his age, always standing between her and whatever she was afraid of. He had been drafted in the first cycle. Their mother had collapsed at the door. Their father had said nothing. He had just sat in his chair and stared at the wall until the sun went down. She opened her eyes. The cell was still there. The smell of rust was still there. But something in her chest had hardened into something useful. Something that could take a hit and not break. Across the room, Hyun sat on his bench and watched her. He said nothing to Yuna. But later, when she was resting with her eyes closed, he leaned toward Minji and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "She's not fighting to survive," he said. "She's fighting like someone who has already lost everything." Minji looked at Yuna's sleeping face, the dried blood on her shoulder, the bruised knuckles, the small body that had just broken a fighter twice her size in 61 seconds. "Maybe that's why she's winning," Minji whispered back. In the upper levels of the station, in a private viewing box lined with soft light and expensive silence, Commandant Oris sat in his chair and watched the replay for the 4th time. He was a tall creature with smooth gray skin and eyes like black glass. He had run this arena station for 30 cycles. He had seen 10,000 fights. He had seen humans before, small and soft and quick to die, amusing for a round or two before the crowd grew bored. He had never seen a human do what this woman had just done. He touched a control on his chair. A guard's face appeared on the screen. "The human female," Oris said. "Park Yuna. Move her next fight to tomorrow, and give her something stronger to fight against." He paused. "Something that will finish this." The guard nodded, and the screen went dark. Oris leaned back in his chair and pressed his fingers together. His black eyes reflected the frozen image of Yuna, standing over Laura's broken body, small and bleeding, and completely unafraid. He did not like what he was feeling. It was an unfamiliar sensation, cold and uncomfortable, sitting somewhere behind his ribs. It took him a long time to recognize it as doubt. They gave her no rest. Oris made sure of that. The second fight came the next day. Her opponent was a creature called a Torgan, a being made of dense muscle and skin like cracked stone. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, and its fists were the size of Yuna's head. It moved slowly, but when it swung, the air snapped. One clean hit from a Torgan could break bones that hadn't even been invented yet. Yuna did not try to hit it. She had learned from watching Hyun's eyes the night before, the way he had shaken his head slightly when she asked about weak points. "There are none you can reach with your fists," he had said. "So don't use your fists, use the arena." The arena floor for this fight had stone pillars scattered across the sand, broken columns from some civilization the Dominion had crushed long ago, kept as decoration. Yuna ran. She ran, and the crowd booed because they thought she was afraid. The Torgan chased her, smashing through pillars like they were made of dry clay, sending chunks of stone flying across the floor. But each pillar it destroyed cost it energy. Each swing that hit rock instead of flesh burned fuel its body could not replace. Yuna led it in circles. She climbed the pillars when it got close, leaping from one to the next, forcing the massive creature to look up, to twist, to reach. She made it fight the arena instead of fighting her. And after 11 minutes, when the Torgan stood in the center of the floor with its chest heaving and its arms hanging low, she came down from the last standing pillar and struck it 3 times in the throat, the only place where the stone skin was thin enough to feel pain. The Torgan dropped to one knee, then the other. Then its face hit the sand, and it did not get up. The crowd did not boo this time. 3 days later, they sent twins. Bonded fighters from a species that shared a telepathic link, 2 bodies moving as one mind. They fought in perfect coordination, one attacking while the other defended, switching roles without a word or signal. No fighter had ever beaten a bonded pair alone, because you could not surprise one without the other knowing. Hyun told Yuna something the night before that fight. "Their link reads intent," he said. "They feel what their opponent plans to do before they do it. But I've watched them fight for years. They struggle against randomness, against things that have no plan." So Yuna did not plan. She walked onto the arena floor and let her body move the way it wanted to move. She threw feints that led nowhere. She started attacks and abandoned them halfway through. She changed direction mid-step, reversed her momentum, did things that made no tactical sense at all. She fought like a person having an argument with gravity, messy and wild and completely unpredictable. The twins could not read her because there was nothing to read. Their link fed them noise instead of signal. They bumped into each other. They swung at spaces where Yuna had been a heartbeat ago. They grew frustrated, and frustration made them separate. And the moment they separated, they were just 2 average fighters instead of 1 perfect one. Yuna broke the first twin's ankle with a low kick. The second twin felt the pain through their link and staggered, clutching a leg that was not even injured. Yuna did not waste the opening. She ended the fight in the next 10 seconds. The fights kept coming. Oris kept accelerating the schedule, kept choosing bigger, deadlier opponents, kept waiting for the fight where the small human woman would finally die, and the crowd could go back to laughing. But each time, the gate opened, and Yuna walked out onto the sand. She was still alive, still standing, still learning. Because that was the thing the Dominion had not understood about humans. They had studied Earth from orbit. They had measured human bone density, muscle fiber, reaction speed, and brain volume. And they had concluded that humans were unremarkable in every category. Average strength, average speed, below average durability. They had put humans in the same class as livestock and moved on. But they had not measured the thing that mattered. They had not measured the fact that humans learn. Not slowly like most species, building knowledge over generations. Humans learn in real time. They watch, they adapt, they find the pattern, and they exploit it, all within a single encounter. Every fight Yuna survived made her more dangerous, not because she grew stronger, but because she grew smarter. She absorbed information like water into dry earth. And by the time her opponents realized what was happening, it was already too late. Her 5th fight was against a venomous predator, a fast-moving creature with hollow fangs that delivered a paralytic toxin. Hyun had warned her about the venom. One full bite, and her nervous system would shut down in seconds. There was no surviving it. So Yuna took a partial dose on purpose. She let the creature graze her forearm, just enough venom to numb her left hand, but not enough to drop her. The predator, believing it had landed a killing strike, moved in close to finish her off. It did not expect the human to still be moving. It did not expect the elbow that shattered its striking limb at the base. It fell sideways, screaming, and Yuna pinned it to the sand until the fight was called. Minji was furious afterward. She held Yuna's swollen purple arm and scrubbed the wound with a solution that burned worse than the venom itself. "You let it bite you," Minji said, not a question. "Only a little. You could have died." Yuna looked at her arm. She could not feel her fingers. "But I didn't." Minji opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. She wrapped the arm in silence. When she was done, she held Yuna's good hand and squeezed it hard enough to hurt. In the cells, things were changing. The other human captives, the ones who had kept their heads down and their voices quiet, began to look at Yuna differently. They sat closer to her during meals. They whispered her name in the corridors. A young man from Daegu, who had been taken in the third cycle, began leading exercises in the holding area, teaching the others to stretch and move, because for the first time in years, being human in this place did not feel like a death sentence. The alien crowd was changing too. The factions that had cheered for blood and laughed at Yuna's name were quieter now. A new energy had entered the arena, something that spread from seat to seat like heat from a fire. Aliens who had never cared about the human fights began requesting seats for Yuna's bouts. They did not cheer for her exactly. It was more like they could not look away. Dorak noticed. The grand announcer was many things, but he was not stupid. He felt the shift in the crowd, the way a sailor feels a change in the wind. He stopped making jokes about Yuna's species. He stopped mocking her size. His introductions became shorter, more factual, stripped of the venom he usually enjoyed. He was not afraid of Yuna. He was afraid of what the crowd was becoming when they watched her. Hyun came to Yuna one night after her 7th victory. He sat beside her in the dim cell and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "I have been mapping this station for 3 years," he said. "Guard rotations, maintenance shafts, power conduits, communication lines. I know this station, the way I once knew battlefields." He paused. "I never had a reason to use what I know. There was never a chance. But now there is you." Yuna looked at him. Her face was bruised. Her ribs ached from the last fight. Her left hand still tingled from the venom. "I don't want to just escape," she said. "Sujin is still in the lower cells. They moved her to the special event list. The mass fight." "I know. That's why we need you to keep winning. Win enough, and they promote you to the upper tiers. That's where the controls are. That's where the broadcast systems are. And that's where your brother is." Yuna's breath caught. She had not spoken about Taeho to Hyun. But Hyun knew everything that happened in these cells. That was what he did. He watched, and he remembered. "If you can get to the upper tier," Hyun continued, "I can get a team to the broadcast center. We can do more than escape. We can make sure the whole galaxy knows what's happening here." Yuna stared at the wall. She thought about Sujin's face. She thought about her brother's voice. She thought about Earth, turning somewhere far away, its people not knowing and not caring where their tributes went. "Then I keep fighting," she said. The 10th fight nearly killed her. It was against a creature from a warrior species, fast and brutal, and smart enough to learn her patterns mid-fight. It opened a deep cut along her ribs, and nearly broke her spine, with a kick that sent her flying across the arena floor. She lay in the sand for 3 seconds, the longest 3 seconds of her life, while the crowd held its breath, and the creature walked toward her, with the easy confidence of something that believed the fight was over. She got up. She did not know how. Her body screamed at her to stay down, but something older than pain, older than fear, something buried deep in the bones of what it meant to be human, pulled her to her feet. She spat blood onto the sand and raised her fists. She won, barely. She collapsed the moment the fight was called, and Minji had to carry her out with the help of 2 other captives. But when Dorak announced the result, something happened that had never happened before. He said her name, just her name, nothing else. No jokes, no commentary, just the words, spoken clearly into the silence of 250,000 aliens. Park Yuna, and for the first time, the crowd repeated it. Back in the cell, barely conscious, Yuna looked up through swollen eyes as they carried her through a corridor on the upper level. Through the shimmer of an energy barrier, she saw a face she had not seen in 4 years. Thin, scarred, broken in ways that went deeper than skin, standing behind the barrier, with his hands pressed against the light, tears running down his ruined face. He was alive. Yuna's cracked lips moved. She could not make a sound. But he read the word on her mouth, the way only a brother could. They moved Yuna to the upper tier on the morning of her 14th victory. 2 guards walked her through corridors she had never seen before, past clean walls and working lights and air that did not taste like metal. The upper tier was where the Dominion kept its valuable fighters. The cells here had beds instead of benches. The food had color. It was still a prison, but it was a prison that pretended not to be. The guards opened a door and pushed her inside. The cell was small but bright, with a window that looked out into the black of space. Yuna stood at that window for a long time. She had not seen stars since Earth. The door opened again an hour later. She turned, and there he was. Tejo stood in the doorway. He was thinner than she remembered, so thin that his bones showed through his skin like the frame of an old house. His left leg was crooked, bent at an angle that said it had been broken badly and healed without help. His face was the same, but also not the same. The jaw was sharper. The eyes were older. A scar ran from his forehead across his left eyebrow and down his cheek, a pale line on dark skin. They looked at each other. "You're smaller than I remember," Tejo said. His voice cracked on the last word. "You're uglier than I remember," Yuna said. Then she crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, and they held each other in silence, while 4 years of distance collapsed into nothing. Tejo's body shook. He pressed his face into her hair, and made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite breathing. Something raw and broken that came from the place beyond words. When they finally let go, they sat on the floor, with their backs against the wall, the way they used to sit on the porch of their parents' house in Busan, looking straight ahead. "I fought so you wouldn't have to," Tejo said quietly. "I know." "Then why are you here, Yuna?" "Because a girl named Sujin was drafted. She's 17. She still cries at night." Yuna paused. "And because you taught me we don't leave people behind." Tejo closed his eyes. A tear slid down the scar on his cheek, and he did not wipe it away. "I can't fight anymore," he said. "My leg, it was the 9th bout. Something big stepped on it, and it never came back right. They keep me here to train new fighters. That's my value. That's why I'm alive." "You're alive because you're stubborn," Yuna said. "Same as me." He almost smiled. Almost. Over the next 2 days, Tejo told her everything. He told her about the Dominion's arena network, hundreds of stations scattered across the galaxy, each one running the same bloody entertainment for billions of viewers. He told her about the human tributes, how they were spread thin across the stations, small groups of 5 or 10 or 20, always outnumbered, always alone. He told her about the deal Earth's governments had made, trading their own people for peace, signing the agreements in secret rooms, while the rest of the world was told the tributes were volunteers for a cultural exchange program. They know, Yuna said. The people on Earth. They have to know. Some do. Most don't want to. Teiho's voice was flat. It's easier to believe the lie. Easier to think we're somewhere safe. Yuna thought about her mother, who had stopped going outside after Teiho was taken. She thought about her father, who sat in his chair and stared at the wall. She thought about Sujin's mother, who had screamed at the tribute officers until they pushed her to the ground. She thought about all the families across Earth who had lost someone and been told not to ask where they went. That night, a small device appeared under her pillow. It was no bigger than a button, smooth and dark. When she pressed it, Hyun's voice came through, thin and quiet. "Can you hear me?" "Yes." "Good. I got this from a maintenance worker who owes me a debt. We don't have much time on each use, so listen carefully." He spoke quickly. "The grand spectacle is in 6 days. It's the biggest event of the cycle. Every screen in Dominion space will be broadcasting. Sujin is scheduled for the mass fight in the opening rounds. You've been promoted to the main event." "Against who?" "Vane, the Korath champion. 200 consecutive victories. He's never lost." She pressed her thumb against the device and felt its edges dig into her skin. "During the main event," Hyun continued, "when the entire station security is focused on the arena floor, my team will move. There is a maintenance shaft beneath the eastern corridor that leads to the station's broadcast center. We take it, we take the center, and we hijack the signal." "What signal?" "All of them. Every screen showing the fight will show our message instead. We broadcast to the entire Dominion network. Billions of viewers. Every human captive on every station. And Earth." Yuna's heart beat hard against her broken ribs. "What message?" "Yours. Record something. Whatever you want to say. I'll make sure the galaxy hears it." The device went silent. Yuna held it in her palm and stared at the ceiling for a long time. She thought about what she would say. She thought about who she would say it for. She thought about the girl from Busan who used to work in a factory and walk along the shore and eat cheap noodles with her brother on Friday nights. She did not sleep that night. The next morning, Teiho found her sitting on the floor with her eyes closed, moving her hands slowly through the air, rehearsing strikes against an invisible opponent. He sat across from her and began to talk. "The Korath are built for killing," he said. "Vane is the best of them, nearly 3 meters tall. Natural bone armor covering his chest, shoulders, arms, and thighs. A weapon fused to his right forearm, a blade that extends from the wrist. He is faster than he looks. He hits harder than anything you've faced, and he does not stop. He does not slow down. He does not show mercy." "Where is he weak?" Teiho was quiet for a moment. "There is a gap, here." He touched the back of his own neck, just below the base of the skull. "The Korath have a nerve cluster there. It's small, protected by overlapping plates. But there's a gap between the plates when they extend their neck forward. Like when they lunge. If you hit it hard enough, the plates shift and the cluster is exposed. One solid strike to that spot and their motor control shuts down. Temporary, but total." "Has anyone ever hit it?" "No, because to reach it, you have to be behind a Korath while it's attacking, and no one has ever been fast enough to get there." Yuna opened her eyes. "I'll be fast enough." Teiho looked at her. She saw the fear in his face, the same fear he used to hide when they were children, when their father came home angry, when the storms hit the coast, when the ships appeared in the sky. He had always hidden his fear behind a calm face, so she would not be afraid. But he could not hide it now. "Come back," he said. "You come back." "I will." On the 5th night before the spectacle, Commandant Oris came to her cell. He entered without knocking, the way owners enter the rooms of things they believe they own. He was tall and smooth, and his black eyes reflected the light from the window like oil on water. "You have done well," he said. His voice was pleasant, the kind of voice that made threats sound like compliments. "Better than any human before you. The crowd loves you. You are profitable. Yuna stood by the window. She did not turn to face him. I am offering you a deal, Oris continued. Tomorrow night, you will fight Vayne. You will lose. You will make it look convincing. Let him beat you. Let him finish it. The crowd will have their spectacle, and I will have my profit. He paused. In exchange, I will release the girl, Sujin, and I will release your brother. They will be sent back to Earth alive. You have my word. She looked at Oris the way she had looked at every opponent before a fight. Not with anger, not with fear, but with a complete and total understanding of what stood in front of her. Your word, she said. The word of a man who buys people and makes them kill each other for entertainment. Oris's smooth face tightened. Just slightly. Just enough. You should consider carefully, human. If you refuse, all three of you die. The girl, the brother, and you. I am being generous. Yuna took one step toward him. Just one. She was small, and he was tall, and the difference between them was the difference between a planet and a moon. But Oris took a half step back before he caught himself, and that half step told Yuna everything she needed to know about the kind of creature he was. You've never met a human who had nothing left to lose, she said. Have you? Oris stared at her. The pleasant mask on his face slipped for just a moment, and beneath it was something cold and uncertain. Then the mask returned. He straightened his shoulders, turned, and walked out of the cell without another word. Yuna stood alone in the quiet room. Through the window, the stars burned in their endless black. Somewhere out there, past all the stations and ships and cruelty of the Dominion, Earth turned in its small orbit around its small sun, and the people on it lived their small lives without knowing what was about to happen. She picked up the device Hyun had given her. She pressed the button. She held it close to her mouth and spoke. When she was done, she placed the device under her pillow and lay down on the bed. She closed her eyes and thought of the ocean, the cold gray water near Busan, the sound of waves on the rocks, the feeling of her brother's hand in hers. She held that memory like a stone in her fist. The next morning, she walked to the arena gate for the last time. Taeho stood behind her in the corridor, leaning on his bad leg, his hand on the wall. Come back, he whispered. She did not turn around. She nodded once. The gate opened, and the light swallowed her whole. The grand spectacle began at dawn, or what passed for dawn on a station that orbited no sun. The lights in the arena shifted from cold blue to hot white, and the crowd poured in like a tide, filling every seat, every walkway, every standing platform, until the orbital stadium groaned under the weight of 250,000 bodies. Billions more watched from screens across Dominion space, in homes and market squares, and warships and prison cells, because the spectacle was the Dominion's greatest show, and no one was allowed to look away. The early rounds were slaughter, mass fights, 20 fighters thrown onto the sand at once, clawing and biting and dying, while the crowd roared and placed their bets. Sujin was in the third group. She walked out onto the arena floor with 11 other captives, 8 of them human, and across from them stood creatures that had been bred for nothing but violence. The humans did something the Dominion had not expected. They did not freeze. They moved together, forming a tight circle with Sujin in the center, covering each other's backs, the way Hyun had taught them in the weeks before. They could not win, everyone knew that, but they could survive long enough for the round timer to expire. And that is exactly what they did. 3 humans fell, 2 were carried out alive, but Sujin was still standing when the horns blew, shaking and bloody, but breathing, and the crowd made a sound it did not usually make during the mass rounds. It sounded almost like respect. The hours passed. The sand was raked and re-raked between fights, but the stains never fully disappeared, and by the time the main event was announced, the arena floor was dark in patches, a map of everything that had been lost that day. Dvorak rose on his floating platform. The crowd fell quiet. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The main event of the grand spectacle, Dvorak said. His voice filled the station from wall to wall. He was not smiling. He had not smiled all day. The champion of the Crucible, 200 consecutive victories, undefeated, unmatched, Vayan of the Korath. The far gate opened, and Vayan walked out. He was enormous, nearly 3 meters of bone-plated muscle, his body covered in natural armor, the color of dark iron. His right arm ended in a fused blade that caught the arena light and threw it back like a mirror. His eyes were small and deep-set and completely empty. He did not look at the crowd. He did not need to. He was the crowd's reason for being here. The arena shook with noise. Vayan walked to the center of the sand and stood still, a monument to everything the Dominion believed about strength. Dvorak waited for the noise to fade, then he spoke again. From Earth, unranked to elite in a single cycle, 17 consecutive victories. He paused. The pause was not for comedy this time. It was not for cruelty. It was something else entirely. Something even Dvorak did not fully understand. Park Yuna. The gate opened. Yuna walked out. She was small. She was always small. The bruises on her face had not fully healed, and the cut along her ribs still pulled when she breathed too deeply. Her hands were wrapped in strips of cloth, stained brown with old blood. She wore the standard arena clothing, thin and gray, and offering no protection at all. She walked to the center of the sand, and stopped 10 meters from Vayan. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. The difference between them was almost absurd. It was the kind of difference that made people laugh, except no one was laughing. Dvorak pressed the signal. Begin. Vayan attacked without hesitation. He crossed the distance in 2 strides, faster than something that large had any right to move, and his blade arm came down in a diagonal cut that would have split Yuna from shoulder to hip. She threw herself to the side, hit the sand, rolled, and came up running. The blade struck the ground where she had been standing, and sent a spray of sand 10 meters into the air. He followed. Every step shook the floor. Every swing cut the air with a sound like a scream. Yuna dodged, ducked, rolled, and ran, staying just ahead of each strike by margins so thin the cameras could not tell if she had been hit or not. The crowd watched in breathless silence. This was not a fight. This was a human trying to survive a natural disaster. Yuna tried what had worked before. She targeted joints, aiming kicks and strikes at the spaces between Vayan's armor plates. Her foot connected with the inside of his knee. It was like kicking a wall. The impact traveled up her leg, and she stumbled. And Vayan's backhand caught her across the shoulder and sent her spinning through the air. She hit the sand hard, skidding 3 meters before she stopped. She got up. Her shoulders screamed. Something in it had shifted in a way that should not shift. She could feel the joint loosening, threatening to separate. She ignored it. Vayan came again. She dodged the blade and got inside his reach, throwing a combination at his throat. Her fists bounced off the armor plating like stones off a tank. He grabbed for her, and she twisted away, but his fingers caught her side and squeezed, and she felt 2 ribs crack like dry sticks. The pain was white and total, and it filled her vision with static. She fell. She lay on the sand with her arms around her broken ribs, and the crowd above her waited for the end. On his platform, Dvorak gripped the railing. In the cells below, Minji pressed her hands over her mouth. In the upper corridor, Taeho leaned against the wall and whispered words that no one could hear. Vayan stood over her. He raised his blade arm. Yuna looked up at him. Through the pain, through the blood in her mouth, and the sand in her eyes, She saw the gap. There, at the base of his skull, where the armor plates met the thick muscles of his neck. Tejo had told her about it. The gap opened when a Korath lunged forward, when they extended their neck to strike. Like right now. She moved. Later, when they watched the replay, no one could explain how. Her body was broken. Her ribs were cracked. Her shoulder was half dislocated. But something moved her. Something older than muscle and bone. Something that lived in the deepest part of what it meant to be human. The same thing that had made her ancestors stand up on two legs and walk out of the tall grass into a world full of predators. The refusal to die lying down. She rolled into Vane's legs as his blade came down, the tip striking the sand where her chest had been. She was behind him now, underneath him, and she scrambled up his back like a climber scaling a cliff face. Her fingers found the edges of his armor plates. Her feet dug into the joints of his legs. He roared and reached for her, but she was too close, too small, pressed flat against his back, where his arms could not reach. She found the gap, 2 centimeters of exposed tissue between the plates at the base of his skull. She drove her elbow into it with everything she had left, every gram of strength, every ounce of pain, every memory of Busan and Tejo and Sujin and her mother's face and her father's silence and the sound of waves on the rocks of home. The impact was small. The sound was small, but the effect was not. Vane's body locked, every muscle seized at once, like a machine losing power. He stood frozen for 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, 3. Then his legs gave out, and he fell forward, slow and massive, like a building coming down. He hit the sand, and the arena floor cracked beneath his weight, and a cloud of dust rose around his body like smoke. He did not get up. Yuna slid off his back and landed on the sand on her hands and knees. She was shaking. Blood dripped from her mouth and her nose and the reopened wound on her ribs. Her left arm hung loose at her side. She could not see clearly. She could barely breathe. But she was alive, and Vane was not moving. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then the arena broke open. The sound that erupted from 250,000 throats was not a cheer. It was something deeper, something that vibrated in the bones and the walls and the air itself. Aliens who had mocked humanity for 5 years were on their feet, screaming, stamping, beating their limbs against the railings. They did not understand what they were feeling. They only knew they had never felt it before. On the eastern side of the station, in a corridor no one was watching, Hyun and 4 other captives dropped through a maintenance shaft and ran. They reached the broadcast center in 90 seconds. The 2 technicians inside were watching the fight on their screens and did not hear the door open until it was too late. Hyun's team took the room without violence. The old tactician sat down at the central console, inserted Yuna's device, and pressed 3 buttons. Every screen in the arena went dark. Every screen across Dominion space went dark. Then they lit up again, and instead of the fight, they showed a face. A small face, bruised and tired and unbroken. Yuna's recorded voice filled the station, and every home, and every ship, and every cell where a human sat in the dark, waiting to die. My name is Park Yuna. I am human. They took us from our home. They made us fight for their amusement. They laughed at our names, our size, our world. But we are still here. To every human listening, on Earth, on the stations, in the cells, we are still here, and we remember who we are. The message played again, and again, across the galaxy, on 100 stations, human captives heard a voice that sounded like their own. On Earth, the transmission broke through the Dominion's communication blocks and played on every screen in every city. And the quiet deal that governments had made in dark rooms was dragged into the light for every person to see. In the arena, Dorak stood on his platform with his instruments dead and his screens blank. He looked down at Yuna, kneeling in the sand beside the fallen body of his undefeated champion, bleeding from wounds that should have killed her, and he said nothing. For the first time in his long, cruel career, the grand announcer had no words. He pressed the button in his private box and told his guards to kill the human. But the guards looked at the crowd, at the rolling, thundering, unstoppable noise of 250,000 beings who had just watched the impossible happen, and they did not move. Killing Yuna now would burn this station to its frame. Oris knew it. He sat back in his chair, and his black glass eyes stared at nothing. Minji reached Yuna first. She ran across the arena floor with her medical bag and dropped to her knees beside her. "I'm here," she said. "I'm here. Don't move." Yuna looked up at her. Her eyes were glassy. Her lips were cracked. "Sujin? Alive. She's alive." "Teho?" Minji looked over her shoulder. Teho was coming through the gate, limping hard, dragging his broken leg across the sand. He fell beside Yuna and pulled her against his chest and held her the way he had held her when they were children, when the world was small and safe, and the worst thing they could imagine was a storm. In the cells below the arena, the human captives began to chant. It started as a whisper, passed from mouth to mouth, cell to cell, growing louder with each voice that joined. It was not a war cry. It was not a battle song. It was a name. Yuna, Yuna, Yuna. The aliens in the crowd did not know the word. They did not speak the language. But they heard it, rising from the depths of the station, like something alive, and they felt its weight in their chests, and some of them, without knowing why, began to repeat it. Yuna lay on the sand, with her brother's arms around her, and her friend's hands on her wounds. She looked up through swollen eyes, at the dome above the arena, the transparent ceiling through which the stars burned cold and bright and infinite. Somewhere beyond all that darkness, beyond all those lights, there was a small blue planet, where the waves still hit the rocks near Busan, and the noodle shop still opened on Friday nights, and a factory still stood on the hill where she had once worked and dreamed of nothing bigger than a quiet life. She could not see it, but she knew it was there. She had always known. The arena knew her name. The galaxy knew her name. And somewhere on Earth, a mother lifted her head for the first time in 4 years and heard her daughter's voice coming from every screen in the world. And she stood up from her chair, and she walked to the window, and she looked up at the sky. Yuna closed her eyes. She was broken. She was barely alive. But she was standing. Even lying down, even held in her brother's arms, even shaking and torn and half gone, some part of her was still standing. It always would be.